The warning lights on James Barrett's cargo ship flashed an angry red as the vessel plummeted through Thera's atmosphere. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the controls, fighting against the gravitational forces threatening to tear his ship apart. The electromagnetic storm had caught him completely off guard, frying his navigation systems and leaving him helplessly descending toward the unknown planet below. "Come on, hold together," he muttered through gritted teeth, watching as the ship's hull temperature climbed to dangerous levels. The landscape below was a tapestry of deep purple forests and crystalline formations that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Right now, they just looked like a collection of things that could kill him. The impact came faster than he expected. Metal screamed as the ship carved a deep furrow through the alien soil, pieces of the hull breaking away until the vessel finally ground to a halt. James hung limply in his restraints, tasting blood from where he'd bitten his cheek. His head throbbed, but a quick self-assessment suggested nothing was broken, a miracle given the violence of the crash. Unbuckling himself with trembling hands, James stumbled to the emergency hatch. The ship's systems were dead, and he could smell something burning. Getting out quickly seemed like his best option. The hatch protested but finally gave way with a hydraulic hiss, letting in air that was surprisingly sweet and cool. James dropped to the ground, his legs nearly buckling as he took in his surroundings. The foreign landscape stretched out before him, dominated by towering crystal formations that caught the light of the system's twin suns. The purple vegetation he'd spotted from above turned out to be something between trees and giant fungi, their caps swaying gently despite the lack of visible wind. A quick check of his emergency beacon confirmed his worst fears: the crash had rendered it useless. He was stranded on an uncharted world with no way to call for help. His supplies, if any had survived the crash, might last a week if he was careful. After that, a sound like crystal wind chimes drew his attention. At first, he thought it was coming from the formations around him, but then he noticed movement at the edge of the strange forest. His breath caught in his throat as two figures emerged, and his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. They were humanoid, but that's where the similarities to humans ended. Standing at least 12 feet tall, their bodies were covered in what looked like living crystal, shifting and flowing like liquid glass. Their faces were elegantly shaped, with eyes that sparkled like diamonds, and long, flowing hair that seemed to be made of fine strands of crystal. James stood frozen, his survival training warring with his instinct to run. These beings could crush him without effort, yet something about their graceful movements suggested intelligence rather than bestial threat. The taller of the two approached, moving with impossible grace for something so large. When it spoke, its voice was like music, yet somehow he understood the words. "You are injured, small one," she said, kneeling down to examine him more closely. "I am Nyara, and this is my sister Kalira. You've crashed in our hunting grounds." James swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain still as Nyara's crystalline hand reached toward him, gently touching a cut on his forehead he hadn't even realized was there. "I'm James Barrett," he managed to say. "My ship was damaged by a storm in orbit. I didn't mean to trespass." Kalira moved closer, her crystalline form catching the sunlight in mesmerizing patterns. "The star storm. We saw it from below. You are fortunate to have survived, James Barrett." "Just James is fine," he said, relaxing slightly as he realized they meant him no harm. "And yes, I'm very lucky. Though I'm not sure how long that luck will last. My communications are down, and I don't know if anyone will think to look for me here." The sisters exchanged looks, communicating in what sounded like chiming music. Finally, Nyara turned back to him. "You cannot stay here. The crystal wastes are dangerous for one such as you, and night brings creatures that would find you an easy meal. Come with us. Our haven is protected, and we can tend to your wounds properly." James glanced back at his ruined ship, then at the increasingly ominous-looking crystal formations around them. He really didn't have much choice. "Thank you. I accept your help. Kalira produced what looked like a small crystal from somewhere within her flowing form. As she crushed it in her hand, it released a sweet-smelling mist. This will help with your pain and protect you from the spores in the air. They can be toxic to off-worlders. As James breathed in the mist, he felt his pain recede and his head clear. Nyara carefully lifted him, an experience both terrifying and exhilarating, and placed him on a smooth platform that seemed to grow from her shoulder. Hold tight, small one. We move quickly through these lands. The journey that followed was unlike anything James had ever experienced. The sisters moved with incredible speed and grace, their crystalline forms flowing over and around obstacles as if gravity was merely a suggestion. The purple forest blurred past, and James caught glimpses of strange creatures watching from the shadows, some beautiful, others nightmarish. Finally, they approached what looked like a solid wall of crystal. But as they drew closer, James saw that it was actually the entrance to a vast network of caves, the walls lined with the same living crystal that made up his rescuers' bodies. The light from outside refracted through the crystal structures, creating a rainbow of colors that danced across the surfaces. Welcome to Haven, Nyara said as they entered. One of the last pure sanctuaries on Thera, and home to those who guard the planet's heart. James stared in wonder at the vast chamber before them. Dozens of beings like his rescuers moved about their business, their crystalline forms creating a symphony of light and sound. Structures that seemed to grow from the very walls served as dwellings and gathering places. At the center of it all was a massive crystal formation that pulsed with its own inner light. It's incredible, he breathed, then turned to his rescuers. But what did you mean by, those who guard the planet's heart? Kalira's expression grew serious, her crystalline features somehow conveying concern. Rest first, James. Tomorrow, you will learn why we can never let the mining corporations find this place, and why your crash landing might not have been an accident after all. James woke to the gentle chiming that seemed to permeate everything in Haven. His makeshift bed, fashioned from some kind of living crystal that adapted to his form, had provided the most comfortable sleep he'd had in years. As he sat up, he noticed his injuries from the crash had almost completely healed. Whatever was in that mist Kalira had given him had done wonders. Nyara appeared at the entrance to his chamber, her crystalline form catching the ambient light. You've rested well, small one. Are you ready to understand why you're here? I thought I was here because I crashed, James said, standing up. He'd been given what looked like a suit made of fine crystal threads, surprisingly comfortable and flexible. The crash was merely the vehicle of fate, Nyara replied, gesturing for him to follow. Come. Kalira awaits us at the heart. As they walked through Haven's winding passages, James noticed more details he'd missed in his exhausted state the day before. The crystal beings, the Therans, as he'd learned they were called, weren't just living in the caves, they were somehow connected to them. Tendrils of living crystal occasionally reached out to touch passing Therans, exchanging what looked like pulses of light. The central chamber was even more impressive in his refreshed state. The massive crystal formation he'd noticed earlier pulsed with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. Kalira stood before it, her hands pressed against its surface. The heart of Thera, she said without turning. The source of our life, our consciousness, our very being. And the reason your kind seeks to destroy our world. James frowned. My kind? I don't understand. Nyara placed a hand on the heart, and suddenly the chamber filled with holographic images. James saw massive mining operations on other worlds, planets stripped of resources and left as lifeless husks. The crystal formations on Thera aren't just minerals, she explained. They're part of a living network that spans the entire planet. We Therans are its guardians, born from its essence. The crystals your mining corporations so desperately seek are actually neural pathways, Kalira continued. Each crystal contains millions of years of accumulated knowledge and energy. When processed, they provide incredible power, but harvesting them kills part of Thera's consciousness. James felt sick as he recognized some of the corporate logos in the images. Stellar Mining Consolidated. They're the ones who contracted my cargo run. I was supposed to be transporting mineral samples from the next system over. You were being used, Nyara said gently. The electromagnetic storm that disabled your ship wasn't natural. SMC has been trying to locate Haven for years. They've sent dozens of ships into our atmosphere, hoping the storms would force them down near one of the sanctuary entrances. But why me? I'm just a freelance cargo pilot. Kalira turned from the heart, her expression serious. Because you're expendable to them. If you died in the crash, it would be a tragedy but not one that would draw much attention. If you survived and found us. She trailed off. They could track my location when I called for rescue, James finished, the pieces falling into place. He pulled out his damaged emergency beacon, looking at it with new suspicion. Is it transmitting even though it's supposed to be dead? Nyara nodded. We've been containing the signal, but we can't do so indefinitely. Soon, they will come looking for you. Before James could respond, another Thuran rushed into the chamber. Unlike the crystalline grace he'd seen in the others, this one's movements were sharp, urgent. Sisters. Our outer sensors detect ships entering the atmosphere. At least 3 heavy transport-class vessels. So soon? Kalira's form flickered with what James was learning to recognize as anxiety. They must have had them standing by, waiting for the beacon's signal. How long do we have? Nyara asked. 2 hours, maybe less. They're using the old mining paths to approach by ground. James stepped forward. Let me help. This is my fault, I led them here, even if I didn't know it. There must be something I can do. The sisters shared one of their musical communications, then Nyara turned to him. There might be. The crystals respond to consciousness, to intention. We can fight, but we've never faced weapons like they'll bring. A human mind, thinking in different ways. She paused. It's dangerous. The neural link could overwhelm you. I'm already involved, James said firmly. And I won't let them destroy this place. Kalira approached him, holding what looked like a small shard of crystal. Then let us show you how to become one with Thera's heart. Either we will survive together, or we will fall together, but you are right, you are involved now. You are part of this story. As James took the crystal shard, feeling its warm pulse against his palm, he realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a cargo pilot who'd crashed on a strange world. He was about to become part of something much bigger, a battle for the soul of a living planet. The shard began to glow as it touched his skin, and James felt a tingling sensation spreading up his arm. The chamber around him seemed to blur and expand, and he could suddenly sense the vast network of crystal pathways spreading throughout Thera. It was beautiful, terrifying, and overwhelming all at once. Remember, Nyara's voice seemed to come from both outside and inside his head. The heart responds to emotion as much as thought. Feel its rhythm, let it guide you. We'll be here with you. As the neural link strengthened, James caught glimpses of the approaching ships through the crystal network sensors. They were heavily armed, just as Nyara had feared. But he also saw something else, patterns in the crystal formations, ways they could be used that the Therans, being part of the system, might never have considered. I think, he said slowly, his mind racing with possibilities, I have an idea. But we'll need to act fast, and I'll need both of you to trust me completely. The neural link with Thera's crystal network made James's head spin with possibilities. Through it, he could sense the approaching mining vessels like dark shadows against the planet's shimmering consciousness. But he could also feel something else, the planet's natural defenses, lying dormant beneath centuries of peace. The crystal formations, he explained quickly to Nyara and Kalira, his voice resonating strangely through the link. They're not just neural pathways, they're a defense system. The ancient Therans must have created it during some long-forgotten conflict. Kalira's crystalline form shimmered with surprise. How can you see this when we cannot? Because I'm an outsider, James replied, his fingers tracing patterns in the air as he followed the flow of energy through the network. You're part of the system, like trying to see your own bloodstream from the inside. I'm seeing it from the outside, with different eyes. Through the crystal network, they watched as the mining vessels landed in a clearing 2 kilometers from Haven. Heavily armed troops began deploying, their weapons specifically designed to shatter crystal formations. Leading them was a familiar face that made James's blood run cold. Director Richard Pierce, he growled. Head of Special Operations for SMC. I should have known he'd be behind this. Nyara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, her touch sending ripples through the neural link. You know this human? He's the one who hired me for the cargo run. Seemed too good to be true, now I know why. James focused on the troops' movements through the crystal sensors. They're splitting into 3 groups, trying to surround Haven. We have warriors, Kalira said, her form pulsing with determination. We can fight. No, James shook his head. That's what they're expecting, a direct confrontation where their weapons give them the advantage. But we can do something they'd never expect. He turned to the sisters. How much control do you have over crystal growth? Complete control, within our connection to the heart, Nyara answered. It's how we built Haven. Then here's my plan, James said, sharing images through the neural link. But I need to know, how far are you willing to go to protect your home? As he outlined his strategy, the sisters' crystalline forms began to pulse with an intense light. What he was suggesting was dangerous, unprecedented, but it might be their only chance. We trust you, James Barrett, Kalira said finally. Tell us what you need. The next hour was a blur of activity. Through the neural link, James coordinated with Thuran warriors, positioning them in ways that would appear random to the approaching forces. Meanwhile, Nyara and Kalira began the delicate process of awakening the dormant defense system, their consciousness merging with the planet's crystalline network in ways they'd never attempted before. James felt Pierce's forces drawing closer through the crystal sensors. The director was being cautious, using handheld scanners to check for crystal formations before each step. But he couldn't scan for what he didn't know to look for. They're almost in position, James whispered, though through the neural link, everyone could hear him clearly. Nyara, Kalira, are you ready? The sisters stood on either side of the heart, their forms now pulsing in perfect synchronization with its rhythm. We are one with Thera, they responded in harmony. The network awaits your signal. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what they were about to attempt. If he was wrong about any part of this, it wouldn't just mean their deaths, it could destroy the very thing they were trying to protect. Through the crystal sensors, he watched Pierce raise his hand, signaling his forces to move in for the final approach to Haven. The director's face showed the smug confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. Now, James commanded, sending the signal through the neural link. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The crystal formations throughout the surrounding area began to change, not shattering as Pierce's weapons were designed to cause, but transforming. The neural pathways that had laid dormant for centuries awakened, responding to the combined will of James's human creativity and the Therans' innate connection to their world. The ground beneath the mining forces began to shift as crystal structures erupted from below, not attacking the troops directly but creating an ever-changing maze that separated them into smaller and smaller groups. Their weapons, designed to shatter crystal, proved useless against formations that simply flowed around the damage like living mercury. Impossible, Pierce's voice crackled through their captured communications. The crystals can't be manipulated like this. All our research. Your research was incomplete, Director, James spoke through the crystal network, his voice resonating from every formation around the trapped forces. You saw Thera as a resource to be exploited. You never bothered to understand what it truly is. Through their shared consciousness, James felt Nyara and Kalira pushing their control to its limits, using his strategies to turn the very environment against the invaders. Crystal walls rose and fell in rhythmic patterns, herding the confused troops back toward their ships. Those who tried to fight found their weapons encased in flowing crystal, rendered harmless without harming the wielders. But James could also feel the strain this level of control was putting on the sisters. The neural network was never meant to be manipulated so aggressively, and maintaining such precise control was draining them rapidly. "We need to end this quickly," he said through the link. "Are you ready for the final phase?" "We trust you, James," Nyara's voice came through, though he could hear the exhaustion in it. "Show them the true power of Thera." James closed his eyes, channeling everything he had learned about the crystal network into one final gambit. Around Haven, the crystals began to sing. The crystalline song that erupted from Thera's depths was unlike anything human ears had ever heard. It wasn't just sound, it was pure energy given voice, resonating through every crystal formation in a harmonic cascade that made reality itself seem to vibrate. Through the neural link, James could feel the music's effect on the invading forces, confusion giving way to awe, then to fear as they realized they were experiencing something far beyond their understanding. Director Pierce alone seemed immune to the display. "Impressive light show," his voice crackled through their captured communications. But SMC didn't invest millions in this operation to be scared away by parlor tricks. "All units, switch to sonic disruptors. If we can't break the crystals, we'll shatter them at their resonant frequency." James felt Nyara's alarm through the link. "The disruptors, they could damage the heart itself." "Not if we don't give them the chance," James replied, his mind racing through possibilities. "Kalira, remember how you shielded me from the toxic spores when you found me? Can you do something similar with the crystal structures?" Kalira's form pulsed with understanding. "A harmonic barrier?" "Yes, but maintaining it around all of Haven." "No need," James interrupted. "Just create focal points, make them think they've found weak spots in our defenses. Director Pierce is arrogant, he'll concentrate his forces where he thinks we're vulnerable." Through their shared consciousness, James felt the sisters begin to implement his strategy. The crystalline song shifted, creating apparent gaps in their defensive network. As predicted, Pierce ordered his forces to concentrate on these points, not realizing they were being drawn into carefully prepared positions. The sonic disruptors powered up with a deep, threatening hum. James watched through the crystal sensors as Pierce's troops took aim at what they believed to be Haven's weakest points. The director himself moved to the front line, determined to lead the final assault. "The moment they fire," James communicated through the link, "hit them with everything we have. Not the crystals, the ground beneath their feet." The first sonic blast thundered through the air, aimed directly at one of Kalira's harmonic barriers. The sound struck the crystal formation and, instead of shattering it, was caught in a complex web of resonating frequencies. For a moment, the air itself seemed to crystallize. "Now!" James commanded. Nyara and Kalira, their forms now blazing with energy borrowed from the heart, triggered the final phase of their defense. The seemingly solid ground beneath the mining forces suddenly liquefied as countless microscopic crystal structures activated simultaneously. Pierce and his troops found themselves sinking into a sea of flowing crystal that moved like quicksand, but with purpose and intelligence. "What is this?" Pierce shouted, struggling as the crystal flow pulled him down to waist level. "This isn't possible. The mineral samples we analyzed were dead crystals." James projected his voice through the network again. "You studied Thera's bones and thought you understood its body. You never realized you were dealing with a living being." The crystal flow continued its work, not harming the trapped humans but rendering them completely immobile. Their weapons, including the sonic disruptors, were gently but firmly extracted from their grasp and absorbed into the flowing mass. Through it all, the crystalline song continued, but now it had changed tone. What had been a warning became something else, a melody of life, of connection, of the deep intelligence that permeated every part of Thera. James felt it resonating through his neural link, and he knew the invaders could feel it too. "Look around you," he commanded, his consciousness merged with the planet's voice. "Really look. You're not standing on dead rock. You're touching the skin of a living world. Everything here is connected. Everything here is alive." As if in response to his words, the crystal formations around the trapped forces began to glow with shifting colors, displaying images of Thera's complex ecosystem. The invaders saw the flow of energy through the planet's crystal veins, the intricate dance of consciousness that connected all its inhabitants, the delicate balance their mining operation would have destroyed. James felt something shifting in the minds of Pierce's troops. The neural link let him sense their changing emotions, fear giving way to wonder, greed transforming into understanding. Only Pierce himself remained resistant, his face contorted with fury. "You're a traitor, Barrett," the director spat. "Do you have any idea what this discovery is worth? The energy potential alone is nothing compared to the value of a living world," James finished. He turned his attention to the trapped troops. "The rest of you, you have a choice to make. You can leave this place and tell SMC the truth about what you found here. Or you can stay." Nyara's voice joined his through the crystal network. "Learn our ways. Become part of something greater than yourself. The choice must be freely made," Kalira added. "But know that Thera accepts all who approach with open hearts." The crystal flow began to recede, releasing the troops from its grip but maintaining a firm hold on their weapons. One by one, the soldiers stood, looking at their surroundings with new eyes. Several immediately began walking back toward their ships, but others remained, their expressions showing a mix of fear and fascination. Pierce, finally released from the crystal grip, stood alone, his facade of control completely shattered. "This isn't over," he snarled. "SMC won't just. SMC will do exactly what we tell them to do," James interrupted. "Because if they don't, we'll reveal everything, including how they deliberately sabotaged my ship and tried to use me as an expendable scout. I don't think your shareholders would appreciate that kind of publicity, Director." Through the neural link, James felt Nyara and Kalira's approval, but also their exhaustion. The level of control they'd maintained had drained them severely. As the remaining troops made their choices, more than he'd expected choosing to stay, James knew the immediate crisis was over. But he also knew this was just the beginning of a much longer story. 3 months after the battle for Haven, James stood at the entrance of the Crystal Cave, watching the twin suns set over Thera's transformed landscape. The crystal formations that had once been merely beautiful were now alive with purpose, their surfaces rippling with colors as they channeled the planet's energy in ways both old and new. His neural link to the crystal network had become permanent, a gift from Thera itself, according to Nyara. Through it, he could feel the pulse of the living planet, the thoughts and emotions of its inhabitants flowing like music through his consciousness. But more than that, he could feel the changes their victory had set in motion. "Lost in thought again, small one?" Nyara's melodious voice brought him back to the present. Her crystalline form seemed to glow in the fading light, and James felt his heart skip a beat, something that still happened every time he saw her. "Just appreciating the view," he replied, turning to face her. "And thinking about how much has changed." "Indeed." Kalira emerged from another crystal pathway, her form shifting with amusement. Who would have thought a human crash landing would lead to all this? The all this she referred to was visible throughout Haven and beyond. Where once the Therans had hidden their true nature, now they were reaching out to the stars. The soldiers who had chosen to stay had become ambassadors of sorts, learning the ways of the crystal network while helping to establish new protocols for interaction with off-world societies. Director Pierce had been true to his word about not letting things go, but not in the way he'd intended. His attempt to launch a legal battle against James had backfired spectacularly when evidence of SMC's illegal activities became public. The resulting scandal had led to a complete restructuring of the company's leadership and a new approach to resource exploitation throughout the galaxy. "The first diplomatic delegation arrives tomorrow," Nyara said, moving to stand beside James. Her crystalline hand found his, their fingers intertwining in a way that would have seemed impossible months ago. "Are you ready?" James squeezed her hand gently, marveling at how natural it felt now. "As ready as I'll ever be. Though I still think it's crazy that they want me to be part of the negotiating team." "Who better?" Kalira asked. "You bridge both worlds, brother of crystal. You understand both the human desire for progress and the need to protect living worlds." The term "brother of crystal" still made James smile. It was the title the Therans had given him after he'd chosen to undergo the ceremony that had permanently bonded him to Thera's network. The process had changed him subtly. Small crystals now grew along his temples and spine, allowing him to interface directly with the planet's consciousness. But more importantly, it had given him a home and a purpose he'd never known he was looking for. "They're going to want to study the crystal network," he said, voicing the concern that had been nagging at him. "Some will see the potential for weapons, others for energy production. How do we show them what's really important?" Nyara's form pulsed with warm light. "The same way you learned, by letting them experience the connection firsthand. That's why we're opening the learning chambers." The learning chambers had been James's idea, inspired by his own experience of connecting to the network. They were specially grown crystal chambers that allowed visitors to temporarily link with Thera's consciousness in a controlled way. It wasn't the same as a full neural link, but it gave people a taste of what it meant to be part of something larger than themselves. "And if that's not enough?" he asked. "Then we have you," Kalira said simply. "Your story, your transformation, it shows what's possible when different species truly understand each other." James felt a wave of emotion flow through his link to Nyara. Their connection had grown deeper over the months, evolving into something that transcended traditional relationships. Through the crystal network, they shared not just thoughts but the essence of their beings, human and Theran, flesh and crystal, yet somehow perfectly complementary. "Speaking of understanding," Nyara said, her form shifting with what James had learned to recognize as nervous excitement, "there is something we must discuss before the delegation arrives." James felt her anticipation through their link, along with something else, a sense of possibility that made his breath catch. "What is it?" "The heart has been changing since you joined with the network," she explained. "Growing in new ways. We believe it might be possible for us to have children." The statement hung in the air like a crystal chime. James stared at her, then at Kalira, who was practically vibrating with suppressed joy. "The combination of human consciousness and Theran essence," Kalira explained quickly, "it's created new patterns in the crystal matrix. The heart thinks it can help us bridge the gap between our species." "Our children would be something new," Nyara said softly. "Neither fully human nor fully Theran, but a bridge between worlds. If that's something you want." James felt tears forming in his eyes as the implications washed over him. Through the neural link, he could sense the possibility she spoke of, new patterns of life forming in the crystal network, waiting to be given form. "Yes," he whispered, pulling Nyara close. "Yes, absolutely yes." As the last rays of the twin suns painted the crystal formations in shades of gold and purple, James Barrett, cargo pilot turned crystal-touched diplomat, held the love of his life and looked toward the future. Tomorrow would bring challenges as they helped forge new connections between worlds. But tonight was for celebrating the most profound connection of all, the one that had brought him home. The crystal song of Thera swelled around them, carrying notes of joy and promise into the gathering night. Somewhere in the depths of Haven, the heart pulsed with new rhythms, preparing for whatever wonders tomorrow might bring.